Applejack whipped the sweat from her brow as she and her big brother Big Macintosh hauled their last cart of apples towards the barn. It had been an unbearably hot afternoon in Sweet Apple Acres, and Applejack wished for nothing more than to put her hoofs up and enjoy a cold mug of cider. Yeah, can you get the last bushel to the other end of the barn, Big Mac? Applejack asked. On any other day, she may have not let on that she needed help, but she was far too hot and sore to worry about her pride. Yup, came a very short reply. Big Mac was also drenched in sweat, but somehow maintained his grin and a calm demeanor. Woo-wee, that's some weather we've been having, ain't it? Hope it's might different when the Zap apples get here. Not sure they could stand this kind of heat, Applejack said, breathing a sigh of relief when she was finally able to release the harness of the apple cart she was carrying. Yup, Big Mac replied. See you inside, Applejack said, already out the barn doors as she bade him farewell. Applejack's iconic hat seemed to offer some no relief from the sunlight, and our trek back to the house, tired, sore, and irritable. Her only solstice was day's labor, and was the thought of refreshment and relaxation. However, when she rounded the corner, she spied a familiar-looking carriage with an iconic dollar symbol on the side. The trademark meant business tycoon Filthy Rich. The two earth ponies harnessed to the carriage nodded in their direction as informal greeting, and Applejack warily nodded in return. She wondered why Filthy Rich would be visiting the farm so soon. He usually only appeared when the Zap apple jam was prepared and ready for sale. Applejack was already surprised to see the front door wide open and peered inside suspiciously. She found Filthy Rich talking to Granny, who was sitting on the corner and looking timid and frail, curled up in a rocker with a tremble in her hooves. It didn't take long for Applejack to understand that this was not a very pleasant visit. You owe a great deal more than that, Granny Smith. I, for one, would hate to see you lose this farm, Filthy Rich said. In all manner of pleasantry gone from his tone, Granny Smith looked at him with a wide and pleading eyes, but before she could answer, Applejack came to the rescue. What in tarnation are you going on about? Applejack asked sternly. She narrowed her eyes and glared at the Filthy Rich, protective instincts taking priority over common sense. Your granny here is in quite a bit of depth with me, young filly, and it's high time I paid my money, Filthy demanded. The Apple family farm hasn't borrowed any money from you in ages, Applejack protested, stomping towards him with a growl. Now hold right there, Applejack. That ain't worth true youngin', Granny admitted softly. Applejack broke her glare to Granny in confusion. What do you mean, Granny? Well, I didn't want you to worry none about this season. Hasn't been really too kind on Sweet Apple Acres, and we've been needing a little bit extra bit to keep up with the demand. It's just bad weather spell, that is all. It'll pass, Granny Smith admitted. That may be true, but what has passed my deadline, and what with interest and everything, I'd say you owe about half of the farm's worth by now, Filthy said, with no inclination of mercy of his tone. Half of the farm? Granny, why didn't you tell me you were hurting for money? Applejack asked in horror. Now, Applejack, this is my business. Don't you worry none, Granny said. You're a reasonable pony, Filthy. Can't we, work something out? I believe I may know just the thing, Filthy said, calming his speech a little and straightening up his necktie. I think I could overlook this debt of yours if you give me twice the amount of the Zap apple jam this year. But you already took half of it, Applejack pointed out. Precisely, Filthy Rich said smugly. Wait a minute. You want an entire supply of Zap apple jam this year? We need that money along with this sales of cider just to keep this family going in the winter time, Applejack protested. Well, the way I see it, you don't have much of a choice now, do you, Missy? Filthy Rich said, his patience growing thin. You can't actually been considering this, can you, Granny? Applejack asked. Well, Granny stammered, I'll be by in 2 weeks for my product, Filthy Rich said, having already considered his deal done. And I'll be counting them jars too. So don't you think about going on hold for old Filthy Rich. I get every last jar on this farm. This goes to foreclosure. Do you hear? Applejack was stunned into silence. Filthy cleared his throat a couple times, until she snapped out of her trance and realized that she was blocking his exit. With his head held high, Filthy Rich left the famous farmhouse with a sarcastic good day. Applejack waited until he had gotten in his carriage and was out of hearing range before confronting Granny again. What are we gonna do if we don't get those Zap Apple Jams earning this year? We can't pay off a debt if that means we'll be hurting for money again in the winter months, Applejack said. Your Granny Smith as always thinks of something, Applejack. You don't worry about harvesting those Zap Apples and leave the rest to me, do you hear? Granny said, offering her an apologetic smile. Applejack didn't reply. Instead, she looked back outside the stall open door, storing in the state of apple trees baking under the unforgiving heat of the sun. If the rain stalled much longer, she knew that her family's troubles were only going to get worse. As predicted, the next day saw no improvement for the Apple family. Things have taken a sharp turn for the worse, and Applejack resigned to the fact that she couldn't solve this issue on her own. She raced from Ponyville to the hospital, to which consult the only pony she knew could have figured out a way out of this mess. Twilight? Applejack said, letting herself into Twilight's castle. Are you in here? I need your help. It wasn't too long before Applejack found the princess pacing in the library. She noted that Twilight was looking a little bit more hard than usual. There were beads of sweat along her brow, and her usually kept mane was hastily tied in a ponytail to keep it off her neck. And in that moment, it dawned Applejack that royalty were in the victims of the unusual weather, and it wasn't a very good sign. Applejack, what is it? Twilight asked, snapped out of her pace and by her friend's entrance. Well, it's a lot of things, really, Applejack replied. She hid the dark circles under her eyes with her hat, hoping that she didn't look as dreadful as she felt. Ah, you came here because you have no other option? Tell me what happened, Twilight said, her voice edging on some strange combination of concerns and patience. First things first, have y'all any heard from Rainbow Dash regarding the weather? Twilight let out a frustrated sigh. Apparently that was not the right question to ask. No, it seems like Ponyville isn't a place for suffering this heat. There's a terrible drought over Equestria, and we have heard that a rainbow production is completely shut down for the time being. It seems that the Pegasi are having a hard time finding enough water to make clouds, let alone rain, Twilight said sadly. I was afraid of that, Applejack said, sighing softly. And the princess? What did she say? Princess Celestia and Princess Luna are looking into a spell that can allow salt water to be transformed into rain clouds. For some reason, it doesn't process the same cloud-stale weather machines. If a spell could be found in the time, the water in the ocean will save us. But until then, Twilight started, before trailed off to the end, that Applejack came off as terrifying conclusion on her own. I offered to help, but they said I'm needed here instead. I've been scouring my books for anything weather-related, but so far, nothing has been remotely useful, Twilight said, gritting her teeth. She hated the thought of being unhelpful in the time of crisis. Well, I sure need ya, Applejack offered, wishing that she could smile in comfort, but unable to go so given the nature of her visit. It's Big Mac. He caught the wind of Granny's debt to the rich family and worked himself to get bone harvesting apples. I was hoping to make up some more money before Zap Apples got here. Darn fool was out of the sun so long that he went inside and got himself sick with heat stroke, Applejack said softly. Wait, is he? Twilight asked. It's gonna be alright. Doc says he's gotta stay in the hospital for a few days, Applejack said. What if Big Mac's too sick? That means, Twilight trailed off before her thoughts can be collected. The Zap Apple harvest. He isn't going to be well in time, is he? That's precisely why I'm here, Applejack said. Oh, Applejack, I really want to help. I really do, but... Twilight started. Yeah, I know, Twi. You've got a lot on your plate already. I didn't come here asking for your help like that, Applejack said. Then what did you need from me? Anything I can help, I'm happy to do it, Twilight said, with an apologetic smile. I seem to recall a spell that you said you'd been working on, and if I remember correctly, it was supposed to help you stay up studying on the Princess Celestia, which gave those ridiculous assignments for reading, Applejack said. Yes, but how will that help you? Twilight asked. Well, I may not be the studying up to late, but I would have to figure out a way to stay awake long enough to get those Zap Apples harvested, Applejack said, leading Twilight to come to the conclusion on her own. Oh, I don't know, AJ. I have been perfect at that spell yet. I have no idea what kind of side effects it might have. Besides, you'd be using it to keep up your strength, and all I need is to stay awake for a couple more hours of reading, Twilight said. Twi, you wouldn't ask if it wasn't absolutely unnecessary. Granny Smith has gotten us to quite a financial pickle, and if I don't meet Filthy Rich's quota, I'm gonna lose the farm, Applejack admitted, unable to conceal the panic in her tone. Twilight furrowed her brow and then opened her mouth to protest, but was unable to find the right words. Feeling the pressure with the situation and the frantic pleading in her friend's voice, she knew that she couldn't refuse. Well, I hope you know what you're doing, Applejack, she cautioned, leading her friend from the library to retrieve her spell. The sun's heat then showed no remorse of the day of the Zap Apple harvest. Despite the severity of their solution, the Apple family found it difficult to gain any outside assistance. Most extended Apple family was trending to do their own dying orchard, and Applejack's friends had all places to be. Still, there were a few kinds of pony villains willing to lend a hoof, although most of them didn't last more than a few hours under the sun. By day's end, only Apple Bloom and Applejack remained. When the sun finally sets over the horizon, Apple Bloom collapsed on the ground, grateful that the heat was finally subdued. Although Applejack felt her own looming exhaustion, she was too stubborn to give up her work. She looked up at a few bushels that they had collected and then the remaining Zap Apple trees, realizing that despite their hard work, more than half of the bucking was left to do. As soon after sunset, Granny Smith emerged, struggling as she walked what appeared to be 2 glasses of lukewarm cider. Sis, aren't you coming in? Apple Bloom asked, her older sister warily. Granny says there's fresh pie inside. Now I can't do, Apple Bloom. Well, I was hoping we'd get through more trees before sundown. But you know as well as all that disappear at midnight, Applejack replied. Now, Applejack, we do our best. Besides, I can't tell you about dropping the young filly. I am not about to have another grandchild in the hospital from exhaustion, Granny encountered. That ain't gonna happen, Granny. Y'all go on ahead. There's a few minutes of strength in these legs of mine, and I want to make sure I get as many Zap Apples as we can, Applejack said, walking away from them. Applejack knew it worried Granny to see her working this hard, but she also knew that she couldn't risk letting on her own important this was with Apple Bloom around. Thankfully, every pony had kept quiet about their financial problems around the little filly. As Applejack wandered from another tree, she could feel the contents of the saddlebag moving the rhythm to her steps. Somewhere buried beneath her supplies was a little potion vial that hopefully answered her problems. Then, when Twilight produced the sleep preventative potion, on the previous day it came out with strongly emphasized condition. Applejack had promised to use this as a last resort. The absolute last option, Twilight was worried about the side effects might cause more damage than what it's worth, as she had the time to truly study them. Applejack could see the genuine concern for her friend's expression and gladly kept the promise, even knowing how full she intended to use it. Still, staying true to her word, Applejack gave the Zap Apples unbuckling the best effort without it. It was an hour or so after sunset, when she could feel her body threatening to shut down. Her muscles tensed up and her vision became hazy, causing her coordination to suffer. Although the sun was long gone, beds of sweat were still rolling off her cheeks, and her breathing became raspy and short. Her rapidly escalating exhaustion, Applejack made emasculation in her bucking and ended up being pummeled to the ground by the Zap Apples. She had grown to put a hoof on her throbbing head, shaking some apples loose from her head. Applejack heaved slightly as she carefully pulled Twilight's potion out of her saddlebag and held it up in the moonlight. "I'm sorry, Twi," Applejack whispered out loud, "but I've got to save this farm." She pulled out the cork free from the potion vial and downed it in one gulp. However, the moment she drew the vial away from her lips, she felt a wave of unbearable sickness. Clasping her mouth with her front hooves, she turned away from the Zap Apple trees before the potion and most of her dinner came back up with a vengeance. Apple Bloom just woke after sunrise when she heard a loud crash coming from the kitchen. She wiped the sleep from her eyes and quietly trotted down the stairs to see what was happening. When she entered the kitchen, she was surprised to find a row of jars filled with freshly prepared Zapple jam. Somewhere hidden in behind them, she could see the outline of her older sister, who was still busily stirring the current pot of jam while simultaneously measuring out the correct amount of honey. "Sis?" she asked. "Apple Bloom," Applejack said, and started. "Hey, what in the hay are you doing awake so early?" "I heard a crash," Apple Bloom said. She maneuvered her way into the kitchen, making sure not to knock over the precautiously stacked jars. "How long have you been up? How did you make all this jam?" "Oh, once I get a little bit more focused, the rest is easy. Don't you worry about that, little sis. I have all the jam jarred and already gone sale for 2 days earlier than expected. When we can be done with this all financial nonsense, he'll get this order all right," Applejack said. Speaking so quickly, it was hard for Apple Bloom to hear and understand what he was saying. Apple Bloom took a step back and accidentally hit the kitchen table with the completed jar of jam wobbled and threatened to fall. Apple Bloom gasped and tried to catch it before it hit the ground, but Applejack beat her to it, swiping the jar in midair and setting it down on the ground before hurrying it back to the jam she was making. Apple Bloom blinked a couple times, and all of her sister's speed and agility. She had always been this focused. How many jars do ya think you've got there, sis? I don't recall making this much jam last year, and we're not even able to get most of the trees yesterday," Apple Bloom asked wearily. "Oh, I finished a bucking," Applejack said, so matter-of-factly. "Finished a bucking on your own? All of them?" Apple Bloom gasped in disbelief. "Yup. We'll have more jam for this season than we ever have before," Applejack said. "But why didn't you and Granny go and get help for more jam?" Apple Bloom asked. "You don't have to worry about that this year, little sis. I've got you covered," Applejack said, obvious to loaning her sister's tone. "But Granny promised," Apple Bloom whined defensively. "The thing is, Apple Bloom, Granny's got a lot on her plate right now, and with Big Macintosh gone and the figure, I can get the jam made a lot faster." "But it just ain't fair. I already told the Crusaders they would come up and help you out with this year's batch," Apple Bloom protested. "Sometimes you can't have what you want. That's how life goes. But, Apple Bloom, I'm not arguing about this right now." "But Applejack, I said no!" Applejack screamed. She turned to Apple Bloom and growled with a slight twitch in her eye. Apple Bloom felt the pit of her stomach drop as she backed away from her nervously. She had never seen her sister this angry before, and it frightened her. After a moment or so of silence, Applejack blinked a few times and shook her head, returning to the pot of jam. "You're gonna ask if you can help ya," Apple Bloom whispered. Applejack paused for a moment, and then looked back at her sister with a frown. "Yeah, I'm sorry, sis. Why don't you run around and play instead? I'm doing just fine on my own," Applejack said, the tone of her words letting Apple Bloom know that what her decision was final. Defeated slightly, hurt by her sister's words, Apple Bloom left the kitchen while fighting back a sniffle. My, is that mighty impressive young filly, Filthy Rich exclaimed. He watched in delight as his staff loaded the jars of jam into this cart. It's nice to see a little hustle these days. And the debt? Applejack asked, finding it difficult to remain as still as she stood beside the Filthy Rich. Repaid is in full as far as I'm concerned, Filthy Rich replied. Good, Applejack said, rubbing her right front leg with all much left. She could feel the demeanor in her body and was aching somehow to get some more work done. 400 jars of jam for a debt repaid. Pardon? Filthy Rich asked. 400 jars. That was a deal. Twice the order from last year? Applejack asked cautiously. I believe I said every jar of jam, young filly, Filthy Rich said with narrow eyes. You know you're a reasonable pony and all. If you know we don't get sales from the Zap apples, we'll be making herding again for the winter months. You figure since you're getting older so quickly, you might want to hold on to the few jars, Applejack said, trailing off. I appreciate your business sense, Applejack, but a deal's a deal. Even with extra jars of jam, that debt will still be technically underpaid. But I'm doing you a favor, and all I ask is for the jars as I promised. Applejack's heart was now racing, with her blood pressure increasing rapidly. Now hold on just a minute. That's unfair, and you know it. It ain't about being fair. It's about how the conducts do business, Filthy Rich said, cutting her off. Applejack stamped her foot in frustration, but Filthy Rich held out a hoof to stop her before she could say anything else. Tell you what, I'll let you buy back some of the jam for half price, for personal use and of course, if you're herding for funds by the winter months, when you know you can come to old Filthy Rich. Applejack snorted angrily. Her legs began to quake and her eyes narrowed, though she would have liked nothing more than to cuss the Filthy Rich out. She clenched her teeth shut instead. Without another word, she stomped back towards the orchard, each hoof step beating against the ground in anger. Meanwhile, Apple Bloom, Scootaloo, and Sweetie Belle remained hidden in a bush nearby, trying to understand what they've seen. It can't be true. It just can't, Apple Bloom said, not wanting to believe what she was wearing. Sweetie Belle threw her hooves around her friend's hug until Scootaloo interrupted them. Guys, I think there's something off about Applejack. What do you mean? Apple Bloom asked. Well, she seems kinda mad, Scootaloo said wearily. Of course she's mad. That green stallion won't even let us keep a single jar, and she's even worked so hard, too, Apple Bloom said, trailing off. Yeah, but, Scootaloo started. I'd be mad, too. I can't believe Diamond Tiara is going to have this old over our heads. Reformed or not, she'll never let you live this down, Apple Bloom, Sweetie Belle pointed out sadly. Guys, Scootaloo said, her eyes growing wide, it ain't getting over the satisfaction. I said we grab us a couple jars and hide them before Mr. Rich can get them all from the house, Apple Bloom said. Yeah, Sweetie Belle replied happily. Guys, Scootaloo shouted. What, Scoot? Apple Bloom started, but was cut off when she followed by Scootaloo's gaze. Applejack was bucking an old apple tree angrily, kicking it so fiercely that it beginning to weaken. The free fillies can hear the unmistakable sound of the trunk cracking, so they raced over from their hind place to call out a warning. Applejack couldn't hear the filly's cries. She was in loss of rage, imagining that instead of bucking a tree, she was bucking the tar out of some greedy business pony. She could see a smug grin and selfish gleam in his eyes, reflected on the tree trunk. She panted and sweat as she bucked, so focused on getting her out of her frustrations. She didn't even realize the tree was falling apart. Branches cascaded down and left little cuts in her fur as they fell. However, Applejack remained unfazed and unable to feel the slightest bit of pain. Soon after, the image of Filthy Rich on the tree began to laugh, as if to mock her efforts to take out her anger. Although her back hooves were physically unable to handle the amounts of stress that she was making them perform, she didn't care. All she could think about was bucking that smile right out of the pony's face. Apple Bloom and the other Crusaders were only a few yards away when they heard the terrifying crunch. At first, they believed that Applejack had actually managed to buck down an entire apple tree, but upon closer inspection, they realized a sickening truth. It wasn't the tree that they had cracked, but the bones in Applejack's back legs. They were unmistakably visible under Applejack's skin, letting out a sigh and causing her hooves to turn the wrong way. Sweetie Belle screamed in surprise, and Scootaloo lost all color in her cheeks. Apple Bloom was frozen in place, horrified of what she witnessed. Meanwhile, Applejack's ears were ringing as she felt a wave of nausea as she attempted to buck the tree again. This time she felt a tremor in her body when her hooves made contact with the bark. She didn't realize or recognize the pain feeling. It only served her as a way to confuse and anger even more. She tried even bucking again, and ringing in her ears got louder, and her vision blurred. Contact with the tree sent a wave of shock through her body, and she felt her muscles tense and freeze. Applejack stumbled onto the ground, still obvious to the broken bones. She looked up at the tree, but no longer recognized it to be anything other than Filthy Rich towering above her, delighting her in defeat. "Applejack!" Apple Bloom cried, averting her gaze back to her sister's hooves. "Applejack!" she screamed again. Applejack was unresponsive. She was still staring intently at the tree. Apple Bloom then caught the look of fear and anger in her sister's eyes, and looked at the tree in confusion. "Applejack?" Apple Bloom said in a voice barely above a whisper. Somewhere behind her she could hear Sweetie Belle throwing up. "I'll get help," Scootaloo offered, taking the first opportunity to get away as far from the place as possible. "Quit, you're all laughing," Applejack gasped, her voice cracking as she spoke, attempting to get her back up. But each time she tried, she faced a new wave of nausea and unresponsiveness. Applejack then felt some pony tugging at her hoof, and she turned around to see Apple Bloom hovering over her. Apple Bloom was saying something to her, but all was heard was muffled snouts, no meaning or a loud unyielding ringing in her ears. She tried once more to get up, but Apple Bloom protested, pointing her back her hooves. Applejack propped herself to see what was the fuss about, and she realized what had happened. She had tilted her head to the side, wondered why she hadn't felt any pain. Even now she failed to see the marred state of her fur, caused by the fallen branches of debris. Apple Bloom shouted something incoherent again, and ran far away. As soon as she left, the ringing in Applejack's ears waned, and what was conscious she thought she had left. She pulled a few branches from within each other, looking for a few thick and sturdy ones. Her head was swimming, and she felt another wave of nausea, but it wasn't deterrent from her task. Once she had found what she needed, she pulled her useless back legs again in front of her and laid them out as straight as she could manage. Her heart was still pounding rapidly in her chest, and she calmly searched for some rope from her saddlebag. She never set a bone before, so she wasn't really willing to wait useless on the ground until some pony found her. She positioned her front hooves over to the legs and applied pressure. When she heard a loud snap, she winced in anticipation and felt a shiver run up her spine, but the pain didn't follow. The second leg was even less of a shock, despite the multiple snapping sounds heard. She once probably had tried to make her makeshift splints to her legs, pulled herself up and using the strength on her hooves. Now she just needed to figure out her way to make it to Ponyville Hospital across town. Applejack stared unblinking at the ceiling of the hospital room. She had grown irritated rather quickly by the staff, who both marveled and castrated her for her making her the way the hospital without assistance. She attempted to explain the situation that she found it difficult to recall in detail. All she could remember was the fury that she felt for Filthy Rich, and the senselessness of beating she gave him afterwards. She continuously demanded to see him, to make sure he was okay. She must have really done a number on him to make her legs break like that. but he was a lot stronger than most stallions ever knew. In fact, he fought the only other pony who might be able to withstand beating the caliber was her older brother. Wasn't he in the hospital too? Applejack's thoughts were louder than what she remembered being. Sometimes she couldn't hear the doctor or nurse ponies over the frantic buzz. She wasn't sure how long she had been in the hospital bed. She couldn't recall having some pony to tell her what she needed rest, but sleep couldn't come. It hadn't been over 24 hours, hadn't it? Wasn't Twilight's potion supposed to wear off by then? That filthy rich pony must have been in a lot of trouble. She wondered how much beating he had taken, you know. She could try and see him. Maybe when the nurse comes in, she'll ask. She also forgot to mention that he might still be around the orchard in pain somewhere. He deserved it, though, especially for the unstainable greed. For some reason, she thought Apple Bloom was there, but that couldn't be right. What she had been doing here. Oh, she really can't forget to tell some pony about Filthy Rich. She just remembered she had given him quite the beating. No, not Filthy Rich. Maybe it was her brother? He was in the hospital after all. Did she break her legs and hurting her big brother? That would be awful. He couldn't take it though. He's tougher and dried than leather. She even wondered why her back legs were bandaged up. She felt fine. Maybe she wasn't supposed to be here. Applejack attempted to get up, but found out she'd been restrained to the bed. What in tarnation? Applejack whispered angrily to herself, pulling the straps that held her down. What was this? Some kind of joke? And who hooved to bandage her legs like that? Was something wrong with them? Having a little trouble there? Some pony asked. Who was there? Applejack snapped, looking around the empty room in confusion. Maybe she just needs a little assistance, brother of mine, a second voice said. Film and Flam? Applejack hissed under her breath. What are you two spineless, no-good, fast-talking hooligans doing here? Whoa there, Missy, Film said. Is that any way to talk to the ponies I can get you out? Film asked. Get me out? What? Hey, what's going on here? Why can't I move? Applejack asked, thrashing about. If you've got something done, I swear. What? You'll buck us to death? Flam taunted. Now, brother, I wouldn't go taunting a crazy mare. She's killed a pony that way, you know, Film said with a sly grin. Killed a pony? Applejack snapped angrily. Her own brother, too. Such a shame, Film said. You leave my brother alone, Applejack screamed. She then turned her restraints on her hooves and pulled as hard as she could to get it free. I always knew you were prophetic, came a different voice. Trixie, what in the hay is going on here? Applejack asked. I had to see for myself. Poor Applejack, beating the tar out of her own kind. Trixie said. I would have done such a thing. Then how did you explain the broken legs, Trixie asked, indicating to her bandaged hooves. Applejack looked down at her legs in confusion. Why they were bandaged? Did she get hurt? Why couldn't she remember? I'm sure the taste of our famous tonic was sure curious, Flim said, holding out a bottle. Guaranteed to put you back on your hooves or your money back, Flam said. Maybe she deserves to be like this, Trixie said.